Welcome to the Endo Belly Girl podcast. I'm your host, Alyssa Chavez. I'm a nutritional therapy practitioner and restorative wellness practitioner on a mission to change the way that we support women with endometriosis. Endo is a full-body disease that impacts your mind, body, and spirit in countless ways that aren't often addressed the way that women truly deserve. We are here to talk about all of it. Please keep in mind that the content of this show has been created for educational purposes only and should never be used as a replacement for medical diagnosis or treatment. Hey, my friend, and welcome back to the Endo Belly Girl podcast. Did you know that it takes an average of 7 to 10 years to get diagnosed with endometriosis? Maybe you have a story about that yourself. That's nearly a decade or more of pain, confusion, and being dismissed by doctors. Now, it is, at the time this episode is going to be released, we are in March, and that means it is Endometriosis Awareness Month. Now, I know many of the people listening to this podcast may already have an endo diagnosis, and so you're listening to this podcast to kind of get next steps and what to do to support your body. However, I do know that there's a population of people listening to this podcast who don't have a diagnosis but are suspecting that they have endometriosis. Maybe a doctor has mentioned it and they just haven't been able to get a definitive answer, and or maybe you just have been researching on your own and paying attention to your symptoms and you're suspecting that endometriosis might be the case. And so if that's you, this episode is for you, although I really feel like this is kind of for everybody. This is an episode that you could totally even share with somebody who really might benefit from it. If you hear about somebody who's struggling to get a diagnosis or is wondering if endo might be a thing, I think this is important to listen to, because when it comes to Endometriosis Awareness Month, odds are if you have found this podcast, you are aware of endometriosis because you probably didn't just randomly hit play on a podcast all about endometriosis. If you did, cool, welcome. I think most of us listening here are already aware, but I think it's also a matter of just better understanding just what's happening in the world of endo, what's happening, in a sense of things that we can affect change on in the long term, and also just learn to better advocate for ourselves as endo warriors. So I was saying that it takes an average of 7 to 10 years to get diagnosed with endo. And of course, that's an average. That means for some people it's shorter, for some people it's longer. From my own experience, I believe that it took about 10 years to get a diagnosis. And I say believe because I'm just going based on symptoms that I had. I actually never even went to a doctor for many years because, well, I'm going to dig into that today, but largely because period pain is so normalized that I never really thought I needed to go to a doctor for it. And so that was actually the big reason behind my own delay in getting a diagnosis, which is a whole issue in and of itself, much less what happens in doctors' offices and, different places around the world. And we're going to dig into all of that today. Now, if you have your own experience with getting an endo diagnosis, I would love to hear about it. I love to just make connections and hear different people's stories. So come and find me on Instagram at EndoBellyGirl and just shoot me a message and just share what your story was about. I would totally love to hear about it. Okay, but let's dig in today. We're going to really look and explore and unpack why in the world it takes so long to get an endo diagnosis, why it's so hard to get an endo diagnosis, and even how you can advocate for yourself to make sure that you're able to get an endo diagnosis when you need to, if you need to. Okay, so first and foremost, let's unpack some myths versus truths when it comes to endo and endo diagnosis. Myth number 1, period pain is normal. Every woman deals with it. This is the myth that I was told forever. Truth, mild cramping, mild pain can be normal, but debilitating pain that affects daily life is not. Endo pain can feel like labor contractions or like a hot knife twisting inside of your body. And if your period is so bad that it's making you miss school, work, or social events, that's a sign that something is wrong and your body needs some support. Myth number 2, this is just something that I hear said, people are told in doctors' offices at times. Your ultrasound was clear, so you don't have endometriosis. And that can also apply, by the way, to an MRI and other types of imaging. Because the truth is, endometriosis often doesn't show up on imaging. Sometimes it does, but not always. And the only way to confirm it is through a laparoscopic surgery, at least at this point in time. There are some hopeful things coming up that we can hopefully look forward to in the long run. But just because an ultrasound or any kind of imaging is clear doesn't mean that endo isn't there. And myth number 3, birth control is the best treatment for endometriosis. Truth, birth control can help manage symptoms for some, but it does not stop the disease from progressing. And this is not just my opinion. This is based on research and everything that's been studied about the condition. Because endometriosis is really a dysfunction of the immune system, it's an inflammatory condition, and true management actually requires a much more comprehensive approach, including diet, lifestyle, and in some cases, excision surgery. So, diagnosis. Why does it take so long, and what can you do to shorten the time that it takes to get answers? Let's dive in. First of all, why in the world is endo so hard to diagnose and take so long? Number 1, this is what I was talking about in my own experience, normalization of period pain. I actually didn't start off having super intense periods. I know some people do. My periods in the early days were pretty smooth sailing. But in my late teen years, all of a sudden, my periods started getting intensely painful. And it was just so normalized. I feel like all the other teenagers around me and other women I knew were just always talking about how painful their periods were. And so I personally did not even go and get answers about that. In fact, the only reason I ended up going to a doctor, I think when I was 20-ish, was to go on birth control because, again, that's just a very normalized part of growing up and becoming a young woman. You go on birth control. And I honestly don't even think I discussed with my doctor at the time the fact that my periods were so painful. I don't even think I brought it up because it was so normalized. And I think that that's super common. Another thing is just lack of awareness in medical training. There are doctors out there that I wouldn't say they've never heard of endometriosis, but maybe aren't aware of how much of your body it can affect, the fact that some women don't even experience pain, but will have other symptoms like infertility, like gut-related symptoms. And so that actually kind of leads me into the next piece of it, which is misdiagnosis, right? Because so many women with endometriosis don't discover that that's the issue because first they're diagnosed with IBS, PCOS, anxiety, any number of things that can come up. And sometimes it is a co-diagnosis. There certainly is a possibility of having both, but also it's not uncommon for it to be a misdiagnosis. And, that just delays you getting the care that you really need. Another thing is just the general dismissal of women's pain in healthcare. And I think that comes back to that whole conversation about the normalization of period pain, but also I just feel like there's a lot of dismissal of like, oh, you're fine. It's just period pain, or it can't be that bad, or just not really understanding. Maybe more so with male doctors who just have never experienced that, could never really understand what that's like. I know there are some wonderful male doctors out there, so I really don't want to bash the men in general, but there's also just a reality to it's much harder to understand something that you never experienced, right? Just like I don't know what it's like to be a man. I'll never know that. And there's so many things like that in life. Again, there's the whole idea of endometriosis is not always seen on imaging. In fact, that happens often. I can't tell you how many stories I've heard of women who had gotten all the scans done, everything was clean, but they went in for surgery and then found out they had endometriosis, which is a whole thing because it's a big deal to have a surgery. And especially if you don't know what direction that's going to go when you get in there, you could come out of surgery and still have all the healing and medical bills to deal with and still not have an answer. So that part, I totally understand the challenge with that. And then there's finances. Let's be real. Finances can be a major barrier to getting a diagnosis. Doctor visits, surgeries, all of that can be difficult to access. It might not be covered by insurance. It might just not be affordable. I remember when I was wanting to have an excision surgery and really exploring that option, which I did end up doing in 2022, I went to multiple doctors. I found a surgeon who I really liked and wanted to work with. And I remember and took my insurance because that was definitely a challenge that I ran into as well. It can be difficult to find, all the things at once. And I still ran into challenges with that. I mean, I remember going in, she just had wanted to do an ultrasound before the surgery. And I think that one appointment, my 10-minute ultrasound, I got a bill for like $600 and something. And that was with insurance. So that can be challenging, much less the surgery itself. I won't go into all the ins and outs, but just it can be very expensive. I know many people who are just paying out of pocket for that surgery too, because they're not able to find a specialized surgeon who also takes their insurance, and that can be a huge financial burden. So I wanted to talk about that today. Some of the common roadblocks that I see to diagnosis. Definitely one of those is doctors downplaying symptoms, or even friends and loved ones not believing you and downplaying, right? You might hear things like, it's just a painful period. Just go take some Advil or Midol. Having painful periods is just part of being a woman. Or maybe you're hearing things like, you're just stressed. Try to relax. Or you're too young to have endometriosis. Not true, by the way. Or all testing and scans were clear, you're fine. Or you just have a low pain tolerance. Or there's the old classic, let's just put you on birth control. And a lot of this is gaslighting, my friend, right? It's making you believe, it's downplaying what you're experiencing and even making you believe that it's not as bad as you think, right? Or it's all in your head. Maybe you've been told it's just anxiety. And I think it's important to speak to also that gaslighting like this can actually be even more prevalent with women of color. That's something that's, I've seen a lot of evidence of that. Just, of course, it's more anecdotal evidence, but I also just believe that the experiences of women are real. And if you've been sitting in a doctor's office and not been believed and been brushed off, that's where we really need to step up and learn to advocate for ourselves. I think that's so, so important. But I also think it's just important to know that stuff like this is happening so that if it happens to you, at least you know that you're not alone. There's other women who have been through this, and there's a way forward, right? And that way forward is to trust your instincts if you know something is off in your body, because typically if you think something is off, it probably is. So trust those instincts and dig deeper, right? Another common issue that I see is just being prescribed birth control as a fix without taking further investigation. And I do believe that this is a big issue. It's kind of become a catch-all solution, being prescribed with birth control. Now, I'm not anti-birth control. I do feel like it can be a viable solution for some women. I just don't love that it's become a one-size-fits-all, Band-Aid solution for anything related to quote-unquote female issues. And I do think that the reliance on that really holds so many people back from digging deeper and investigating further. So yeah, I just think that's important to think about. And there's also confusion with other conditions like IBS or fibroids or interstitial cystitis. I would say IBS is probably the most prevalent that I see, just because there's so much overlap between endometriosis and IBS symptoms and just, the prevalence of gut symptoms. And one thing that I see a lot of is that a woman might really be struggling with gut health. They're having all the yucky symptoms in their gut, and so they go to a GI specialist, a gut doctor. And they're going to be looking at the gut health, but they may not necessarily think of your whole body. There are some fabulous doctors out there who will, but I also know there are many who will specialize in that one area and really only focus on that area. And when that's the case, it's really easy to miss things. That's why I really love to take a whole body approach. And then we also have to think about just the limitations of our current imaging systems. Ultrasounds and MRIs, like I mentioned, just don't always show endometriosis. And, who knows, maybe in the future, those imaging systems will improve and become more clear and we'll be able to see things that we used to not be able to. But for the moment, things are often missed. I hear that all the time. So that's important to know. And at the moment, surgical diagnosis is really considered the gold standard, but it's not always offered to women. It's not always accessible due to cost or location or insurance or any of the things. I know for me, I went through 3 separate doctors before I actually found somebody who was willing to move forward with excision surgery for various reasons. And so that's a common thing as well. And I didn't really know that was a thing, like the difference between excision surgery and other types of surgery like ablation. I didn't know that working with somebody who specializes in endometriosis is so important, that you don't want to go to just a typical OBGYN who doesn't have specific training in endometriosis. I mean, so many considerations that I know now, and thankfully did my research before I went into surgery, but that I didn't know up front, So things that are good to know. So what do we do with all of this, right? We have 2 options the way that I see it. One, we can get angry about this and get upset and be frustrated that, it's so hard to get answers. And that's all valid, mind you. Please feel the way that you're feeling about that. But it's like anything. We can sit down and complain about it, or we can take action. And there's a couple of things when it comes to that. One is there's certainly ways to take action in a bigger sense in that there are organizations who are supporting endometriosis and research and all the things. So you can become involved, you can donate. There's different ways to involve yourself with that. But on a personal level, the biggest thing really is just learning to advocate for yourself. And this has been huge for me. I am naturally a much more introverted person, which I know cracks me up that I am a podcast host now, because who would have thought back when I was younger and, was very much allergic to things like this. But I just felt it was very important to get this message out to the world. So here we are. But definitely advocating for myself was a big challenge up front. But at the end of the day, you are the only part of the equation that you actually have control over. Is the way that endo warriors are treated always fair? Of course not. But while we are working to change the system, which can be a slow process, what you can do in the meantime is learn to advocate for yourself. So let's have a chat about how to make that happen. Definitely, one thing is to recognize red flags from dismissive doctors. Think about all the things that I mentioned. And I think most importantly, just does it feel right? When you're sitting in the room with that doctor, does it feel in alignment with the way that you want to support your body? Because if not, just know that you have all the permission in the world to fire your doctor and go find a new one. That's always a possibility. You are not stuck. Another thing is keeping a symptom journal. I think the better that we get to know our own bodies and seeing how pain levels and our cycles and food triggers and even digestive symptoms change over time can be super powerful. And then I think it's also good to know about key tests and referrals to ask for. So I mentioned before the difference between an OBGYN and an endometriosis excision specialist. So it's always good to look for somebody who really specializes in endometriosis because it's complex. It's not kind of a, easy to solve, quote unquote, female problem. It's quite a complex disease. And to be perfectly honest, yes, there's a hormonal component to it, but it's much less a hormonal issue than people think. There's a lot of involvement with the immune system and inflammation and all of that as well, which I know I've talked about a lot on this podcast. But it's something that most typical OBGYNs just probably don't have the experience and knowledge to really help you with. So if you're looking for somebody like that, an experienced endometriosis excision specialist, I recommend checking out some resources like I Care Better or Nancy's Nook. Those are two really good options that can just help to connect you with somebody in your area. And also, I think it's important just to know how to respond or what to say when you're in a doctor's office. Because I know, especially if you're just feeling like you've been shut down, you've been brushed to the side, it's hard to really know what to say to help yourself to get to that next step that you need. So that can be as simple as starting by saying something like, I've been experiencing debilitating pain for X amount of years, and I really want to explore endometriosis as a possible cause. Can you refer me to a specialist? Or something like, birth control is not a long-term solution for me. I'd like to discuss diagnostic options, including laparoscopy, if that feels in alignment with you, of course. These are just examples, not exactly what you have to say. And I also think it's good to have a way to respond to some of the statements that I mentioned earlier that you might hear from a doctor or even a friend or loved one who might have the best of intentions, but maybe doesn't really get it. So, for example, if you hear something like, your pain is just normal period cramps, you might respond something like, actually, my pain is severe enough that it affects my daily life. I am unable to go to work, go to school, exercise, fill in the blank for you, and it doesn't improve with painkillers. I want to explore endometriosis as a possible cause and discuss a referral to a specialist. Or maybe you hear, your ultrasound is clear, so you don't have endo. Your response could be something like, I understand that ultrasounds don't always detect endometriosis. Can we discuss other diagnostic options like a laparoscopy? When somebody says, you're just being dramatic, everybody gets cramps or period pain, you can respond something like, I wish it were just normal cramps, but what I experience is far beyond that. Endometriosis is a real condition, and my pain can be as severe as labor contractions. If somebody says, have you tried yoga or essential oils? Your response might be, those things might help with stress, but endometriosis is a medical condition that requires more than lifestyle changes alone. Or you might hear something like, at least it's not cancer. And your response could be something like, you're right, it's not cancer, but it is a chronic disease that can cause daily pain, infertility, and organ damage. Just because it's not life-threatening doesn't mean it isn't life-altering. But my friend, this is now me talking. Back to Alyssa here. If you're struggling to get diagnosed, I just want you to know as you're listening to this that I see you. I've been there. The medical system might try to dismiss you, but you know your body better than anybody. If something feels wrong in your body, it probably is. Keep pushing, keep asking questions, and don't stop until you get the answers that you deserve. Be relentless in advocating for yourself. There are doctors out there who will listen. There are treatments that can help, and most importantly, you are not alone. You are strong, and you are worthy of care. Okay. Just had to say that today, my friend. All right. And I just wanted to also remind you that there are support systems out there. There are online communities, there's therapy, there's finding validation in the endo community in general, right? You can do things like join Facebook groups. You can join or even start a local endo warrior meetup. I know that's been something I've seen happening in my area. You can go to therapy if that's something that feels in alignment with you. Not saying that therapy will solve endometriosis. It's not all in your head. But it can be supportive just because dealing with a chronic illness is a lot. So some options to think about. EMDR is a type of therapy that has been shown to be supportive. There's always talk therapy. I don't know a lot about therapy, mind you. These are just kind of things I'm recommending that I have heard be really supportive for people. Or breath work. This is actually something that I've really enjoyed. I haven't really had a lot of personal experience with therapy in the traditional sense, but I personally have really had positive experiences with breath work. in various capacities, it just can be a great emotional release because there's a lot that we hold on to. And you can do something like join an Endo community. So you guys might be aware that I have a membership called the Endo Wellness Initiative, and this is a community of people where we connect, we talk through things, we work on a lot of the dietary and lifestyle stuff together. We do live calls where we can connect. We have a community group. I only open doors to the membership a few times a year. But if you're listening to this and the doors are not currently open, you can always join the waitlist, and that way you make sure you find out when doors are open. So if you head over to www.endobellygirl.com/join, JOIN, the link is always in the show notes for that as well. You can find out when doors will be open, you can hop on the waitlist, and that way you'll be ready to go as soon as doors are open again. I actually work with many women who actually don't know if they have endometriosis or not. So just know that whether you have a diagnosis or not, you can still get support. I have worked with one-on-one clients who come to me saying, I think I might have endometriosis, but I'm not sure. I haven't been able to get diagnosed. And I can absolutely support in that same fashion. I also have members of the Endo Wellness Initiative who suspect that they have endometriosis, don't know for sure, and are just looking to support their bodies from the inside out anyway. And I fully support that. No discrimination here. Diagnosis not required around here. All right, my friend. So I just wanted to end on a positive note and just leave you with words of encouragement to just keep going if you've been on your journey. If this episode resonated with you, take a moment to share it with a friend who needs to hear it. If you've been dismissed, keep pushing for answers. You, my friend, deserve to be heard. And again, I will remind you, you can always reach out to me. I actually love hearing from my listeners because it makes me feel like I'm not alone. I am recording this episode by myself and am an endo warrior myself. And I love, love, love to hear from you guys and hear what you're getting out of the show and all the things and just hear your stories. So if you're feeling like you just want to connect, you want to talk to a fellow endo warrior, just know that my doors, so to speak, are always open. You can find me on Instagram at EndoBellyGirl and feel free to just shoot me a message. Like I said, I love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your story. I'd love to hear your journey with getting a diagnosis, all the things. All right, my friend, I hope you have the most wonderful rest of your day, and we will talk soon. Thank you so much for joining me today, my friend. If you loved what you heard, be sure to share with a friend and subscribe so that you can keep coming back for more. If you are ready to take the next step towards getting to the root cause of your endo symptoms like endobelly, pain, fatigue, and so much more, you need to download my free ultimate guide to building your own endometriosis diet. You can find the link in the show notes or at www.endobellygirl.com. Until next time, my friend.